Hello there, welcome back. And I'm delighted to welcome Elly Wade from our very own Maxon training team to Siggraph.
Hey everyone,
yay! So Elly's obviously very famous, and she, you may know her from the hands-on with Maxon webinar sessions and the demystifying post-production sessions that we run every week on maxon.net/events, so go and check those out. But Elly's going to be talking about Redshift today.
I am, yes.
And the beauty of Redshift is that we keep turning out more and more features. And so I think you're going to be talking about some of the things that have been recently released, and so to capture people's attention that, hey, if you didn't know about this, that sort of thing.
Yes, so stuff that's been released kind of this year, but mainly the last couple of weeks, and then who knows, maybe some future stuff.
Stick around and something may happen. Okay, all right, that's intriguing. So, okay, over to you, Elly.
Thanks. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's nice to see you all. Thanks to everyone who's here in the audience and to everyone who's watching, online. It's good to be here. First time at Siggraph, first time in Canada, and yeah, loving it. So, as I said, my name's Elly Wade, hi, and I'm going to be doing some stuff in Redshift, and it's going to be a bit of a sneak peek. So we're going to look at some of the stuff that's come out recently, the last couple of weeks, also the stuff that came out in April, because we had a massive new release in April, and then who knows, maybe at the end I'll treat you to something that's not released yet. So, as Simon was saying, I work for the amazing Maxon training team, and they are an incredible bunch of people. Maxon as a company is just it's a real dream come true. But these guys here, we've got Thanasis who's here with us, are just so much fun to work with. They love to teach. And I just love having the ability to go, hey guys, I really wish I could do this. And then they spend 2 hours teaching me how to do it. So really, all the credit for anything that I do is actually down to them. If you want to follow me on Instagram, if you want to drop me a DM, if you want help with projects, or if you just want to give us suggestions for new things, you can do that. I'm pretty friendly, and I don't mind a little DM. So it was Elly, and my official title is kind of trainer and 3D workflow specialist. It makes me sound more important than I really am, if I'm being totally honest. And feel free to check us out at Maxon Training Team on YouTube. We record all the sessions that we do, whether it is, demystifying post-production, hands-on sessions, Maxon Color, Ask the Trainer, VFX and Chill, 3D Motion Show, all of that stuff gets recorded and we upload it for you guys to check out on YouTube. So enough about me. I don't really like talking about myself. I'd rather talk about software. So here's a little bit of an overview. We're going to dive into, as I said, the new features, some of the new stuff that's come recently in the last couple of weeks. So Redshift are really, the speed at which they develop and improve Redshift is one of the main reasons why I love it, and I love to use it, and I love to train it as well. So they're really focusing on volume improvement, so a lot of volumetric stuff, how volume shaders react to incoming light, all that great stuff. We have black body emission, which is I'm going to show you a little bit later on, and that's how we can create realistic fire and smoke with VDBs. And the big one is kind of random walk and subsurface scattering. So that's where we're going to start. And eagle-eyed people will see there's a little extra stuff at the end. I'm going to try and build the tension. I'm building the tension for the sneak peeks. So random walk, let's have a look at that. Let's dive into the software. Enough of my PowerPoint that looks like a 5-year-old's made it. And let's get into cinema. I'm better at cinema than I am with Keynote, so. So yeah, let's have a look at subsurface scattering and what exactly that means. I'm going to create a pretty basic scene because I want to show you how simple it is now to create subsurface scattering in comparison to kind of the previous way. So a lot of my scenes I like to build from scratch, especially during training sessions, and I like to take advantage of our asset browser, which has a whole library of scenes, materials, all that great stuff that we could need. And I really like this model. This is by, if it downloads, oh my God. Oh, do we have, oh we do. That was good. Oh, live panic moment. Okay, yeah, so this was a scene by Eric Smith. He created this, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this model and I'm going to use it to show off subsurface scattering, and that's because it's got some nice areas. It's got some really nice sort of thin detail, and it's got some slightly thicker areas, which is going to really kind of demonstrate and exaggerate subsurface scattering. So let me just steal this guy here. and we're going to create a little new scene. Just going to copy and paste this dude in here, and we don't need that material because we're going to build our own. Cool, let's get rid of that one. Cool, so this is the model we're going to be working with. And first things first, I want to change my render to Redshift. This is super important. This is going to allow me to create some Redshift materials and some lighting. So for anyone who doesn't know what Redshift is or has never used it before, it's a renderer, it's a render engine. It's extremely powerful, it's extremely fast, and it is now, it's getting even more and more integrated inside of Cinema 4D to make it feel a lot more native. And it's what I use every single day. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my Redshift render view. And so what's going to happen is as I start to add light, as I start to add materials and move around my scene, my Redshift render view is going to give me basically an idea of what my final render is going to look like. So let me just dock this in here and kick this guy off. Just going to wait a sec. Cool. Right, so we have it in here. We have our model, and we can see in our render view. So as I kind of move around, you can see it's updating on the left. So as we can all probably agree, like, we're all artists here, right? It doesn't look too great at the moment on the left, and that's because we haven't got any lighting, we haven't got any materials. When it comes to working with subsurface scattering, like, my personal opinion is there are three super important things. The first one is your lighting, because effectively subsurface scattering is light basically being kind of like absorbed by the medium, traveling through it and being scattered. If we don't have light, we don't have light scattering. So it's pretty important to kind of focus on our lighting. The second thing is understanding the size and scale of our object and of our model, because this is going to be really important when it comes to adjusting the certain settings of our subsurface. And the third one, of course, is our subsurface scattering itself, the material. So let's do our lighting first. And as I said, I want to show you how simple this is, because I did a session basically a month before this new like subsurface way of working came out, and it was pretty technical. Like, I'll show you the settings as well. Yeah, so I'm obviously super thrilled that it's nice and simple for me to teach now. So I'm just going to grab myself an area light, and I like to just do a little simple trick where I target my area light to my object. It just makes it easy when I move it around. So if I move my area light, maybe sort of like reposition it up a little, maybe a little bit bigger. Cool. So I've got my area light. And again, we can all agree on the left, it's not looking too great, but we're not finished. But what I do like about just looking at this view right now is we can already get an idea of kind of how our subsurface or how the light is going to interact and affect our model. Because we've already got this like intense area on the left, and so we're going to have a lot more of an intense light going in, traveling through, being scattered, and we'll get that sort of more translucent area, and then we have the darker areas which are going to be more saturated and look a bit more diffuse. And so I like to see this like this to get an understanding of how it's going to look. And then let's just do some ambient lighting. So we can do that, throw in a dome light, maybe even add a HDR image just to kind of like bring out more of these details. This is what I tend to do, this is how I tend to work. What should we use? Let's use this guy here. So I'm just going to stick to doing everything from the asset browser. It makes it a little bit easier for me. And let's just switch off our background in there. Cool, right, so we've set up our two lights. If I switch those off, we have like the version, and then we have the nice version. Cool. So from here, now I've done my lighting, I can now create my material. So I want to come into my material manager, which is just this little icon here, and it opens this area up. If I go to create Redshift material, we have our, I'm going to say the previous default material is a Redshift material. And so I'm going to open this up just so I can show you how, or like the settings of the previous way of creating subsurface. And then I'm going to show you the new lovely way. So if I just open up my attributes, these are the attributes of my Redshift material. So these are just the base properties. So I don't even need to worry about going into my node editor. I don't need that. I just need these. So if we come down, we can control diffuse, reflection, refraction, transmission. And inside of here, we have subsurface. And so these are the previous settings. And I don't mind admitting this. I don't mind embarrassing myself. I am not a very technical person. You may not believe me because I know how to use Cinema 4D and Redshift a little bit. But believe me, I'm not very technical at all. And so when I learned this, or had to try and learn how to do this, I didn't know what attenuation meant. I didn't know about absorption. I didn't know about scatter coefficient. I didn't know those things. I needed like a PhD in subsurface scattering, I guess. So to research these things and to understand how they work is what we needed to do in order to create subsurface scattering. You have to understand about the absorption and about the scattering in order to do what you want to do. However, in April, the Redshift team created the standard surface material, and it is just, for a start, it's an industry standard way of working. We can create metalness far easier, and it is just a great way of working. So now I no longer use the previous default material. I use the standard surface, and the subsurface scattering settings in there are just so much simpler. So let's get rid of this guy, and let's just have a little look in here. So again, we have similar types of terminology. We have our base properties, we have our reflection, transmission, which is your refraction. So if you want to create like glass and things like that, you would, enable transmission. Pretty much everything has a weight value. So if I just throw this on, let's actually have a little look at this. We're going to have a default grey plastic material. And then back in here, so a weight value is, I think of it as like enabling or like switching on that particular input. So if I didn't have any diffuse, I'm going to reduce my weight to 0, and now we haven't got any diffuse. I can then reduce my reflection weight, and then we have nothing. This is good, trust me. And we're going to come all the way down, and we're going to go to subsurface. And so if we have a look at even the terminology, it is so much more artist and user-friendly. And for me, as someone who's super not technical, I love it. It's so great. And we have a weight setting here. And so if we want to enable subsurface scattering, nice and simple, all we have to do is increase our weight value. Then on the left, we can now see that subsurface is kicking in. So even though we have no diffuse, we have no reflection, we have subsurface. From here, what I'd do next is I would choose the color of my material. So let's create, like a jade material. And so I'm going to come up to my color input, and I'm just going to choose my color. Let's do something like, something like this maybe. Cool. So for the sake of two settings, color and weight, we now have a subsurface material that we have colored exactly how we want. And what's nice is, as like an artist way of thinking, is this is exactly how I'd like to work. And so we're getting this kind of waxy, rubbery sort of material going on right now. And that's down to our scale input. So the scale value here. So I know I've kind of skipped over radius, but we're going to go back and have a look at that, because the scale is kind of the next thing that I would potentially adjust. So what the scale does is it determines, so for a start, it's in the units of the DCC that you're working in. And what that means is, because I'm working in Cinema 4D, the units are centimeters, this scale is 1 centimeter. And what it means is it's how much our light travels inside of into our medium. And so this is where I was saying that third thing that was super important is understanding the scale and the size of the objects and models in your scene. So I know this is a pretty big model. So if I click my coordinates manager down here and I click my dragon, you can see like the model is pretty big. It's 388 by 509 by 383. So what that means is a scale of 1 centimeter is pretty small. We're not having our light travel too far into our medium, or into our object, or however you want to call it. But what's great is this is going to allow us to create different types of materials. So when it comes to subsurface, it's not like a this or that. It's like, are you creating wax? Are you creating milk? Are you creating foam, rubber, or kind of like skin? Skin's a very big one. And the way to think of subsurface, for anyone who doesn't really know, is if I kind of like this is going to sound stupid. If I pull my ear out and put like a light behind my ear, on those thin areas, you'd see more like translucency and more of the light coming through versus those thick areas. And that's kind of the way to think about subsurface scattering. And it's in a whole variety of different materials. So with our scale, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually increase this to like 10 centimeters and have a look on the left-hand side how different it's going to look, because effectively what's going to happen is our light's going to travel more into our medium. So let me enter 10. Let it have a think about it. So now what's happened is our light is traveling more into our medium. We're getting more translucent areas, especially where that light is on the left-hand side. And then on these sort of like areas where there's less light and there's also like a thicker kind of surface or a thicker part of the object, we're getting a more saturated and a more diffuse looking material. And so if I go higher with my scale, if we go to something like 30, we're getting an even more exaggerated version of that effect, and we're starting to get maybe like a sort of like glassy jelly look, and we're also getting a less saturated version of our color, and that's because we have more light scattering. Let's go back down to 10, and I'm just going to sort of like again skip over this. Don't worry, we are going to come back to those. And we're going to have a look at this new mode. And this is the kind of like the big feature of the last couple of weeks. And that is random walk. And it is a particular subsurface scattering mode. So previously, we had point-based diffusion and we had ray trace diffusion. And basically what they would do is they would do an approximation of the thickness and the size of our geometry. And so it would try and calculate the subsurface and the scattering based on an approximation of the size. What random walk does is it knows the size and the thickness of our geometry, effectively making our subsurface scattering way more accurate. And if I come a little bit closer into these sort of like detailed areas here, so I'm going to let it kind of like have a little progressive render, so we can see these nice details. We can see these like little lovely thin areas on it, on like the dragon's nose and on its teeth. If I change this to ray trace diffusion, it's going to totally change how it looks, and not for the better. So now we're not really getting that detail. We're not getting to see those kind of like individual areas, and that's because, as we said, it's an approximation of the size. And so random walk, even if you see them like now side by side, you can see how much of an improvement this really is, and how this mode is really going to change things. Another thing you'll notice is as I've come out of random walk, we've lost this anisotropy value or input. So if I go back to random walk, we have this. And so our anisotropy basically is the light directionality. So it's the direction of our light. At the moment, we have a value of 0. So what happens is as the light enters and travels through our medium, it gets scattered in all directions. We can do positive values and we can do negative values. And so you might find in like other software, it's called directionality, it's called phase. We go with anisotropy. So if I do a negative value, if I do like a pretty intense value, let's go minus like 8, we're getting a much more sort of diffuse looking material, and that's because the light is traveling back towards our light. If we do the opposite direction, so let's do a large positive value, it is then traveling away. And you can see how it really changes the look of our material and of our subsurface scattering. This is sort of quite like a glassy, or maybe like a gelatin looking material. So it's it's not a value to kind of disregard. It's pretty important. So the final thing I want to talk about is the thing that I haven't yet, and that's the radius. And to demo the radius, I'm actually going to just change my subsurface to white. And so the radius, as we can see, it's a color input. It's not actually a numerical input, and that's because what happens is it is the individual channels for our red, green, and blue when it comes to the light scattering. So as our light comes into our medium, we can control those individual R, G, and B channels. So I'll demonstrate it visually, because that probably wasn't a very good explanation. If I take the R or the red channel down, you'll notice that even though I've not added any color in my color input, we're now getting this kind of like bright blue, like cyan color. And that's because what happens is the light is hitting my medium, our red channel isn't being scattered, only my green and my blue. But what you will notice is on the surface now, so kind of like in these areas, we're still seeing that redness. And it's because we're not eradicating, we're not kind of like removing that channel entirely, that color channel. We're just saying we don't want you to travel through and be scattered, so it remains on the surface. What we can then do is we can do like partial values. So let's say, okay, let's divide my like green channel by 2. And so now what's happening is my blue channel is being fully, is traveling fully through my medium and is being scattered, again, up to like our scale value. Our green channel is partially traveling through and our red channel isn't at all. And so this allows us to create some relatively interesting looking and maybe like artistic results, especially if we combine it with like our color channels in here. We can start to create some pretty interesting and kind of nice looking subsurface materials. Cool. So in comparison to the way Subsurface used to work before, especially for me, like at least, it is far simpler with this new, 1, with random walk, and 2, with the new standard material. And we can always combine it with the other sort of settings in here. So again, remember we switched off our diffuse and our reflection, but let's say we want to have like some nice reflection going on. All I have to do, increase my weight value, and now I've got my subsurface material, but I've also got my reflection values as well, whether I can increase and decrease roughness and all that great stuff. So you can always combine these different base properties. And again, to me, this is a really nice looking material. And if I open up my my material, it's just the Redshift standard material. It's just one node. We don't have to worry about learning these really kind of like elaborate node trees. We can really start to create some nice looking materials quite simply. So before we move on to some of the other improvements, I want to just talk about a couple of extra things that I think relate to Subsurface, and that is subsurface scattering GI, or global illumination. So let me just demo this. I'm going to keep the same project file, and I'm just going to create a nice simple scene just to demonstrate this. Cool. So here we go. This is my really advanced scene here with a plane and a cube. And in my area light, I'm just going to make sure to target my cube again. And then let's just reposition this slightly. I just want to create like a nice shadow here. That's pretty much what I want to do. Cool. That is good. Right, so yeah, we've got our area light, we've got our cube, and at the moment it's just like it's like a solid opaque cube, right? And we've got our shadow here. So if we create, again, just a nice, simple, quick material, throw it on our cube, and we're going to just switch our diffuse off, switch our reflection off, and enable our subsurface. And then let's do a little like nice reddy color. Okay, so what's happening is here we can see as our light is sort of like hitting our subsurface material, it's scattering, traveling through, and we get this redness here because it's like like the easy way of thinking about it is it's a slightly translucent material. And so this is physically accurate. This is what would happen in the real world. Well, this is actually a new feature that came out at the same time as random walk. So in case anyone isn't aware, if you head up to your render settings, head over to Redshift, Advanced, and System, we have a little drop down called Legacy. And this is really great for backwards compatibility of your previous like scenes and files, and it has all of kind of the new updates that come into play. So what we're talking about now is the subsurface scattering GI. So we're getting this accurate sort of GI based on our SSS. Before, it was a bit of a diffuse approximation, and we can see that by actually, if I click this little checkbox, what it's going to do is it's going to disable this new feature, and it's going to revert back to the legacy one, which was a diffuse approximation. So if I switch this on, we can see we get a very different result. We're not really getting, we're getting like quite a harsh shadow, which you wouldn't really have. Like if we look at the translucency of our material, you would have a lot more redness, you'd have a lot less of a shadow, which is what this new feature is doing. And the final thing is translucency. So before we kind of move on to some volumetrics, I just want to really quickly show you how to set up translucency, because they all kind of revolve around this same topic. And again, I'm going to make a super simple scene just to demo this. So let's get rid of this guy. Let's scale our plane down. And I'm going to show you the old way, because it was really nice and simple. And I'm going to show you the new way, which is, again, nice and simple. But I'm a real advocate for the new standard surface material. So I want to show you how you can do all the things that you used to be able to do with this new material. That's kind of what I want to try and do, just help people as much as I can with using these new materials. So let me just sort of pull this over. Let's take that, and I'm just going to copy it and go over. There we go, right, sweet. And then maybe I will just have my light sort of shining right down through, if I can grab that one. I love doing this stuff on a live session. Right, sweet, cool. Here we go. So this will make sense, I promise. So if I kick this off, we can, see not a very nice looking shot, but I want to show you about translucency. So I'm going to grab the previous Redshift material. So this is the way it used to work. I'm going to drop that on my left-hand side. And the way that we would do translucency, we can we can disable our diffuse and our reflection, and we can come into backlighting translucency, increase our weight, and then just choose a color. Really nice, really simple. Let me right click. Oh, I haven't got a right click. There we go. Okay, so we have translucency. That was nice, that was really simple. If I open up the standard material, we don't have backlighting translucency. So for anyone who's used to that method, I want to really, really quickly just show you how you can do it. And it is, again, nice and simple. And you get the same result. So I'm going to drop this on the right-hand side now. I'm going to go in, do the exact same stuff, turn off my diffuse, turn off my reflection. I'm going to come all the way down, and there is a geometry setting which has something called thin-walled. And thin-walled basically is going to tell Redshift that the object or the model that is on, in our case the plane, has no thickness. So I'm going to switch on thin-walled, and what you'll notice is if we come up to Subsurface, we've basically grayed out a whole bunch of those settings that we're used to using. And that's great, because the ones that are left are the ones that we need. All we're going to do is do a weight value of 1, just like we did with translucency, and I'm going to paste in my color, and we have the exact same result. We have the exact same type of translucency. Cool, so those were sort of like the things I wanted to talk about when it came to subsurface scattering. I wanted to show you the new simplified way of working in the standard material. I also wanted to show you random walk, and again, the SSSGI and this translucency. And so now let's have a look at some of these volumetric improvements. So if I go back to my little keynote. So as I said at the start, quite a big thing that the dev team over at Redshift are doing is working on volume improvements. And so some of the key ones that I want to talk about just sort of briefly is the volumetric anisotropy and then black body emission, which is going to be really great for creating realistic sort of like fire and smoke explosions if you're used to working with like VDBs and stuff like that. So let's head on back into version 26, grab a new scene, and yeah, let's build up. I'm going to show you how you can bring in a VDB. So if you're used to like X particles and exposure effects, you can actually export VDB explosions with channel data, and they can then be brought into Redshift. I actually got one off of I might butcher this, Jenga FX. Has a bunch of VDBs that you can download for free and use, which is great, so definitely check that website out. And so the way that you bring this in, again, first things first, let's quickly change our renderer to Redshift, and let me just go 1920 by 1920. The reason I do this is because it's just a nice square format, so I can show you my render view and I can show you my viewport. It is not a necessity. So the way that we bring in a volume is we come up to our volume tab, and then we have a RS volume in here. And if we take a look at our attributes, we have the ability to drop in a path, and this is where you would drop your VDB. So if I come into this little menu here and then get to find this, here we go. So gasoline explosion 1 is what I'm going for, and I've got my VDB file. So I'm going to open this up, and again, we can't really see anything. So the way that we can preview this is we can come into our display and we can come into points. I'm just going to increase my points to 50. The more points, just the more sort of points that's going to display your VDB. And again, because this is a animation, I need to come into animation, come into mode, simple, detect frames. That's then going to detect my animation. If you were just working with a still, let's say you had like a nice cloud VDB, you wouldn't really have to worry about doing that. As I press play, we can see we have our preview in here. We have our points. And you're probably thinking it's looking a little bit weird. I'd agree. It's on its side. So if I just rotate this like that, and then let me just turn off my work plane because it gets in the way. And now we have our VDB being represented by our points inside of here. So if I press play on my Redshift render view, we aren't going to see anything. And that's because we have to do a couple of steps in order to actually preview and render our VDB. The first one is we need to have a volume contributing light. And so let me just grab myself an area light again. Let's right click and let's target it. It's just a nice, it's my lazy way of positioning and targeting lights. Let's just sort of move this over, maybe sort of around here a bit more. Where's my top? There we go. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we have a volume contributing light, but again, we're not really seeing anything. And that's because we need one final thing, and that is our volume shader. And in the volume shader is where we see all these lovely new improvements. So if I go to create, Redshift, material, and then volume, and I'm going to drop that on my Redshift volume. And then let me just grab another dome light. Yes, so we're still not seeing anything, which is fine. That's fine. Let me just switch this background off. Cool, so the reason we're not seeing anything is because inside of our Redshift volume, we just need to define our channels and our channel data. And so what I mean by that is, if we come into here, we have different sort of like channel inputs. If I go back to my volume, we have channel information here, density, flames, temperature. If you are used to working with VDBs, so like exposure effects, for example, or flume effects, if you export a VDB, you can export it with particular channel data. And so in our case, it has been exported with density, flames, and temperature. We're going to work with density and we're going to work with temperature. And these need to be put into the relevant inputs inside of our Redshift volume material. So if I come into here, we can go presets and we can search it, or we can just type the word density. And now we see something in our render view. We can see that that density information. So the way that I think of the Redshift volume information is, to me, the scatter is a little bit, I mean, it is our density, but it also can be thought of as our diffuse. Our absorption can be thought of as our translucency, and then our emission can be thought of as our emission or self-illumination or incandescence. And so we can adjust these settings. We can, increase or decrease the density of our volume based on all this channel data. But I'm not too fussed about that. I don't want to go too much into that because there's more I want to show. But the main thing I want to talk about is this anisotropy value, which is how our volume is going to react to incoming light. And this is quite a big thing. A lot of industry-leading renderers have this ability inside of the volume, and it's going to allow us to really kind of define how our volume looks in regards to its reaction to light. So if I do a negative value, what this is going to mean is, if I sort of like come down, if I do negative, it's going to, the light is going to enter our volume and scatter back towards our light source, which is our area light. So now, because my camera is basically in line with my light, we're now seeing that that scattering is coming straight back towards us. If I do the opposite, so we do a positive value, it's now going to scatter away from our light source. And so we can see that just by adjusting this value, we can start to really, artistically dial in how we want our volume to look. And this is important because if we're working with, like, let's say, I don't know, like cigarette smoke or something, that's going to be really light, going to be really fine, versus like in this case, a gasoline explosion, which is going to be really thick, dense, smoky. So it's really nice that we have these sort of like settings now in here that we can get more realistic results. So if we head back into here, let's have a look at black body emission. And so again, I'm going to keep everything default. Let me just change this back to 0. Right, 1. Yep, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. Right, so black body emission. So for a start, I'm going to show you how you'd make this look like a sort of like a fire and gasoline explosion with the previous way, and then I'm going to show you the new way. So for a start, we need to make sure we input our channel. And so as we saw, we had density, flames, and temperature. So inside of our emission, we're going to enter our temperature input. And now we're getting some information on the left-hand side. We're getting a grayscale emission based on this temperature data from our VDB. And so the previous way that we would work is we'd then come in and we would choose our colors of our emission inside of this ramp here. A nice simple way of doing this is actually just by coming into our presets, choosing a flame or a heat preset. Let's go with heat 3, it's quite a nice one. And now we're getting a nice fire explosion. It's looking great. We can adjust our scale, which in my mind is like an intensity. So I can decrease the intensity of my emission and I can increase that. So here we're getting like a super hot looking explosion. Let's go back to 1. And then if I wanted to tweak this and I wanted to kind of art direct and perfect these colors, I would have to come in and I'd adjust these handles, I'd move them around, and that's the way that we'd work. This isn't a realistic way of working. In the real world, the sort of like the look or the color of our emission would be based on temperature. And that is exactly what black body emission does. So sort of remember how this looks, sort of get it in your mind. I'm going to just reset this to default, and I'm going to come in, and under emission mode, I'm going to go to black body emission. And already we can see we're getting a much more realistic looking volume when it comes to like fire, smoke, explosions. And what we also can do, now we're in black body emission mode, we can now control the look of this or the color of this based on the temperature. So the thing is, if I come back to color ramp and I adjust my temperature, it doesn't do anything. These settings don't work. They only work with black body emission. So again, let's come back into black body emission, and then I can, let me get a little bit closer so we can see everything in nice detail. And I'm going to sort of lower my temperature, and now we're getting a more smoky, sort of a cooler looking like explosion. And then we can go in the other direction. We can go super hot. And then what our offset's going to do, it's going to offset those high and those low values. So if I increase my offset, we're going to get those hyper hot. We've got hyper hot temperature, so we can even see some of those blues in there. And so this is just a really great way of quickly and easily making realistic looking fire and smoke explosions based on VDBs. And one little extra thing in here is if we come into our Redshift volume, we can actually remap our channel data. So inside of here, remember, this is our channel data. This is what we're using inside of here. Well, if we come into our advanced tab, we have a remap range for density and for emission. And what's great is if I sort of change my new max for my emission, this is going to allow me to really dial in this temperature setting even more and have a larger range to play with. So now if I come down, we can start to create some really I really like this. Like it might not be as realistic, but I think it looks really, really kind of interesting. It's like bright and vibrant. And that was just by literally adjusting my remap that gives me the ability to now have a slightly larger range when it comes to adjusting my temperature settings. So those are a lot of the the kind of like improvements for volumetric. There are more coming, but I don't want to steal all of Redshift's thunder. I guess, actually, one quick thing, let me go back. One quick thing is, so as we saw, we now have anisotropy values inside of here, which is how volume reacts to incoming light. Anyone who's used to working with the Redshift environment, so if you create volumetric lighting, fog, all that kind of really cool, interesting stuff, I am one of those people. You may notice that phase is no longer there. We now have anisotropy, and it is the same kind of thing. It has also been improved, and so now when we kind of really push these values to like the min and max, we're no longer getting any breaking. We're just getting some really nice overall effects. So yeah, I did want to very quickly just show that as well. Cool, so some extra stuff. As promised, I did want to talk about some extra little bits that Maxon and Redshift have allowed me to talk about. The first thing is Redshift materials in the asset browser. So I get this a lot. I do a lot of beginners workshops, whether it's in Cinema, whether it's in Redshift, whether it's in both. And time after time, people ask me, oh, Elly, when are there going to be Redshift materials inside the asset browser? Because I'm a real big fan. And what you'll notice is more and more now, like over the last few months, we are getting more Redshift materials in. So Donovan, who's actually here, I don't know where he is, but he is the main man when it comes to dealing with the asset browser. And so we are now getting more models and more objects every kind of couple of months, and those now have Redshift materials in. And so it is happening. It is happening. Like, as you can imagine, these things take a little bit of time, especially when it comes to integration. But I am a real big fan of this. Like, I love to work with Redshift materials. And I think what's great about the asset browser is they're kind of like, especially for a beginner, I mean, I use it anyway. I use it all the time. But for a beginner, it's great because it's kind of like having little Lego pieces and just being able to put things together. I mean, everyone loves kit bashing. It's why kit bash is so popular. Having this stuff as a beginner and being able to just put things together like little Lego pieces and just build something, especially at the beginning, is going to make us want to learn and use these tools more and more. And we also have surface imperfections, we have HDRI images, all of those can be used with Redshift. I use them on a regular basis when I build my materials. I build a lot of them from scratch, and I like to use these nice scratch textures to create nice metal materials. So yeah, that is one thing that is happening already. So all the stuff that I've just talked about is actually released already. It came out in 3.5 in April. And then we had 3.5.05 and then 0.06 recently, which is random walk and these new volumetrics. There is also random walk as it is, the one that's just come out, is already being improved. So I've already seen some of the new, it's not like a version 2, but it's like an update to the one that they've just put in. And so sometimes if you're used to working with subsurface scattering, you can get those dark edges, those dark corners, which can be a nightmare to kind of tweak and get rid of. I've already seen images of this new random walk, and it effectively eradicates them, which is amazing. And this is kind of, I'd say, happening pretty soon. I've already seen some of the results, and so yeah, this is going to replace the new random walk. And it is random walk alone, as we just saw, is pretty impressive, but this new version is just going to take it to a next level. There's also a little tech feature which is nano VDBs, and so if you're used to working with volumes, they can be quite large file sizes. Unfortunately with Redshift, it can't be rendered on out of core. And so they're working on something called nano VDBs, which is going to kind of just basically make those VDBs nice and small. So it won't be like a front-facing feature, but when it comes to keeping file sizes nice and small, nice and neat, it's definitely going to improve that. And so, as promised, I did want to talk about something that is coming, and I need to check my terminology here, but it is material stacking. And so we have the ability, or we're going to have the ability, to stack multiple materials, adjust those materials individually, and use the well-loved texture mode inside of Cinema 4D with Redshift. And so I'm not just going to tell you about it, I'm going to show you. So let me come out of here and let me open up Cinema 4D. So I'm going to show you the original way of how we would do this and how we would create things like decals, stickers, graffiti, add labels to product viz. And then I'm going to show you how material stacking is going to make our lives a million times easier. So let me just hide these. I'm going to start off with, I don't really need that. I'm going to do a nice quick and simple way. Just grab a plane. Definitely not like that. Let's go 10 by 10. Right, cool. Have I got my dome? Yeah, I do. Right, sweet. So I'm just going to show you how we would do this, you know, in Redshift beforehand. So let me open up my Redshift render view, dock that there, kick this off. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. And let me just go 1920 by 1920. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to create really quickly just a standard material. I'm going to throw that on my plane, and I'm going to create like let's say my base color or material is going to be this white. And then let's say I want to have the Maxon logo or my label or my decal or sticker, like whatever you want to call it. I want to have that on there. What we'd do is we'd open up our node editor. And so I work in Cinema 4D's node editor, but it's the same workflow inside of the shader graph if you're used to working with the shader graph. We would drag in our label or logo or whatever. Is that on my plane? It is. And then we would use a material blender. So in my material blender, I've got my base material, which is going to be my main material, my plane. I'm then going to set up my secondary material, which is going to be my label, or in my case, my Maxon logo. I'm going to plug that into my color, and then this is going to go into my material blender, into my material color. And then what we need to do, we need to grab the alpha. So a lot of people, what they do is they actually have an alpha image that they use. But if you're using a PNG, nice and simply, you can actually just use a color splitter and split out the alpha. So I can take my logo, drop it into my input, take my alpha, use my alpha as a blending mask. And then now we can see our logo on here. So this is what we used to do. And so let's even finish that off by sort of coming in. And let's say we want to make it smaller. We'd come into our texture and we would scale it. So let me just scale that down. Wait for my render view to kick in. There we go. So we've scaled that down. But if we don't want to have the duplicates, which chances are we don't, we just have to switch off our UV wrap. And then we're going to have the one. So we have this down here. And then now what we would do, we would rotate it, we would offset it based on these remap settings in here. So we'd move this around, we'd maybe rotate it a little bit, and it will kick in just a sec. And so this would be the kind of the previous way of working, which we can all agree isn't like super intuitive, having to adjust the remap and having to blend between a variety of different materials and really kind of choose where they go. What would be really nice is if we could use Cinema 4D's texture mode like we could with Cinema 4D's standard materials and just do move, scale and rotate and choose where they go. Well, that is what material stacking is going to allow us to do. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that, and let's bring back my scene here. And this original cardboard model, I got my little notes here, was Daniel Malik. It's for free, royalty free on Sketchfab. And so I wanted to do a little shout out to him because it's a nice model and it saved me having to do it myself. So let me just drop my asphalt floor on here so we can get a nice little texture. And I'm going to just drop my cardboard texture, which is just this one here. This is going to be dropped onto my cardboard box. So this is going to be almost like the first layer of my material stack. So this is what we have. This is what we have going on. And so now, let's say I want to create those same decals, those same stickers, using this material stacking and have the ability to control them and move them so much easier than I did before. Well, in this case, I don't even need to worry about doing it on the same texture. I'm going to create a whole new material. I'm just going to create a new standard material. I'm going to open that up. And in here, this is where I'm going to put in my Maxon logo or any kind of like decal. Drop it into my color, and then again we just want to do that color splitter because we want to split out our alpha. Drop that into our input, and then our alpha goes into our opacity now because we're not really doing any material blending. It's all just on one material, and you can see what we have here. And all I need to do is drop it on my cardboard box. And so you're probably thinking, Elly, it looks a little bit weird. I'd agree. However, it's still working at the moment. We can see the cardboard box as our base layer, and then we can see this second material over the top. All we need to do now is just fix this material. So if I come into my material tag, under projection, I'm going to set it to flat. Again, you're probably thinking, Elly, it's looking a little bit weird. Honestly, bear with me. Trust me. And then what we're going to do, we're going to go into texture mode. And texture mode is going to give me this sort of wireframe here. And this is the wireframe of my material. So if I scale this down, scale this down, scale this down, keep going a little bit further, and then reposition this. So I've got my move, scale, and rotate axis tools that I'm now using to position this on the surface of my object. And then again, in our material tag, we can get rid of that tiling by just switching off tiling. And now, nice and simply, I can move, scale, and rotate this decal or this label, this texture. I can even come in, I can sort of say, okay, you know what, let's put it on this side instead. Move that over. And we have the ability to do this without having to worry about material blending, without having to worry about remapping. And then we can do more of these. So I could just come in, I can duplicate this material. All I have to do is change this one because I've already got my setup done. So I can come into here, grab another material. What one do I want? Where's my little this way up? There we go, this one. Drop that in there. Now we've created, once it's thought about it, we've got our second, or effectively our third material in the stack. Drop that in here. Again, come into flat, come into texture mode, scale it right down, scale it right down, scale it right down. Get it on the surface. Just needs to be rotated. So let's rotate that around. 180. And then do the same thing. Get rid of the tiling and then reposition it exactly where I want. Super nice, super simple. And at the moment you can go up to 6 different materials, 6 different textures. And what's great is you can control like all of their individual base properties again, like you would do. So we can come into our original Maxon logo, and let's say we want to create a little lip so it looks like a sticker that's been stuck on. The way that we'd do that, nice and simple, grab a bump map, drop in our color splitter into our input, and that goes into our bump. And then now we're going to get this nice little lip here, so it's going to look like a sticker that's been stuck on. And we have full control of any of these textures, any of these materials up to 6. And this is something that, like, as soon as we all, like, in the team saw this, we were like, and yeah, like, it's really great that, so thanks to Maxon and Redshift for allowing me to to kind of talk about this, because yeah, it's coming. Sort of, I'm gonna end that there. Yeah, so thanks everyone for listening to me ramble about Redshift for about 50 minutes. I appreciate it. Woo.
Fantastic stuff, Elly. We got a whole bunch of questions for you about the workflow stuff. And we also don't want to use up your time, Tony, so we're going to run through these as quick as we can. Yes, but there's been fantastic reaction on the chat, and especially Sarah and Sharon have been saying, "Hey, this is amazing. We love Elly," and so on. So that's
hey to
really
the regulars.
Cool. Yes. So Vitus has a question. With Redshift Random Walk, used it in sculptures or tutorials, but never used it for skin. Have you considered that? Any thoughts about making it work for making skin look realistic?
Yeah, so when I was kind of testing it out, that was something that I did do. And it is, yeah, you can create a nice skin sort of color in there. What I would do is so with the original color input, I can talk about this, or I could show it. But with the original color input, that's where I would choose my skin color. So kind of like, for me, this sort of like, I don't know, pasty pinky colour. And then with the radius, which is where we dialed in those red, green and blue values, I would remove the kind of the greens and the blues, so only the reds are then being scattered inside, and then you would get that kind of that pinky like blood redness in there.
Cool.
That's
Excellent.
That's how I do it.
That's a nice tip. Absolutely. By the way, if you do have follow-up questions beyond this and you want to chat to Elly, training@maxon.net, that gets you through to us as a team. Or even, as you said, it was Elly on Insta.
It was Elly, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'll be hanging out here as well, like for the rest of the day. So
cool. So some more questions. Eric's asking, about the old SSS modes. Would they work in some situations, or do you recommend using the updated ones?
So yeah, absolutely. They definitely do work if you have an understanding of them as well. The only reason I wanted to show this new version is, one, it has random walk, which the older versions, or I don't like to say the word older, the previous versions don't have random walk. And as we saw, that is what really kind of like makes Subsurface look great, because it's really able to see the thickness of the geometry. But of course, yeah, these other features are still there, so we can still do subsurface scattering and multi-SSS the other ways if it's what you're used to.
Cool, absolutely. So both is the answer.
Non-committal. Yeah. You know the deal as a trainer. That's what we have to do, right?
Fence. Yeah, absolutely. Whichever way you would prefer.
Yes.
That's right. And then Eric's got a follow-up question. Is there a way to make the new Redshift standard material the default when you click the plus button?
I'm not sure. Mr. Thanasis. This is what's great about having you here. You chose to sit there. Can you make standard Redshift material the default when you double-click? Oh, okay, Maxon.
To be decided, quite possibly. But
so maybe no then. Maybe
Thank
no
you.
then.
That's excellent question. Michael's got a question. Is there a difference between buckets versus progressive for SSS?
Not now with random walk. So previously there was something with, I think I'm going to get this the wrong way around, I reckon. With the IPR, I think it is always going to defer to ray trace diffusion, even if you set it to the other point-based mode. But yeah, like I think you're going to get the same result with progressive render or buckets. Naturally, I'm going to do my final render as buckets because that's just what I do.
Cool. These are interesting ones. These are also something that we can test out because
yes. So yeah, I guess the important thing, like I feel really like poorly answering these questions. These are all new features. I didn't
mean that.
And I wanted to know. I saw it in your eyes. You were like, Elly, Jesus, come on, give us some answers. So these features, they're very new, and even for me, they are very, very new. I've only been messing with them for kind of like a couple of weeks. So all this stuff, and it's great to have these questions because now, when I dive into it a lot more, I'm gonna have and like be thinking about these answers. But yeah, again, this only came out like a couple of weeks ago, and because the Redshift dev team, they move fast. Well,
the good thing is that you could always log on to Ask the Trainer every Thursday, second and fourth Thursday of the month.
Absolutely.
And we can try these things out live, which is one of the webinars that we run, one of the many webinars. So if you go to
shameless plug,
yes, maxon.net/events, then you can log into those, and again send us a message for that, and we can test it out and show you.
Yes.
So, question about the cardboard box that you were showing: do the bump displacement of textures affect all the other layers? So, it's a bump on the cardboard. Would that bump show through the logo? So
what you'd need to do is, because they're stacked materials, because they're different materials, what you'd want to do is, and what I did with the final, this sort of like this one here, was I then took the bump or the normal map, put it into the decal or the label material, and then connect that into the bump. One thing I would say, currently displacement isn't working, but there's not a lot else I can say about that. Yeah.
Right. No, that's good. We can understand.
Yeah, currently not working, but I imagine will be.
Okay, well, there's a follow-up to that. Would that allow for bump displacement blending? That's kind of a related question.
Yeah, so you would do it in the same way. So let's say you had a really nice like like a series of bump maps that you blended together, and you wanted that across all of the stacked materials. All you have to do is set that up in each of the materials. And that sounds long-winded. Just copy and paste. That's all you have to do. So yeah, if you want the same bump or the same normal or the same displacement when displacement works.
Are you especially supposed to be talking about this?
I might be losing my job.
Were they actually supposed to be talking about this in public, Nick?
Oops. It's good. It's good job we're not streaming.
Who's hiring? Anyone? Anyone hiring?
Well, you heard it here, folks. This is. I mean, that's the nice thing about Redshift coming out with new
Can
stuff.
I blame
all
you
the
for
time.
coming up with the questions? Is that allowed?
Okay, we have a last volume fog question. With that word.
Yes, that's okay.
Currently, we
Yeah,
still
thank
have
God I'm
jobs.
here.
I think for the next 2 minutes at least. All right. Well,
We'll end on a high then, shall I? Then
yes,
just
absolutely.
Drop the mic and walk out.
We may invite you back. Don't worry.
Oh God.
Okay, here's a volume blender asking about volume blender fog, making smoke and that sort of stuff. Would you do that?
Yes, yeah. So you could use the volume builder in fog mode and then drop, the volume shader on there and do that. I just used a VDB because it looked nice and pretty for the demo.
That's
But
the,
yes,
that's the
absolutely.
beauty of having multiple ways to do things like this.
Yes. But I think I did it in a session on the C4D Level Up. We looked at doing, volume fog.
Is that a series of webinars that are available to watch that you already recorded?
I'm doing a second shameless plug.
Would you mind
We're getting good at it.
going back to the contact slide, because then we'll just wrap up and just remind everyone where they can get access to new stuff. There we go. So yes, if you've got more questions for Elly, questions that we're allowed to talk about, in fact, then let us know. But thank you so much. That was so great to run through all those new things.
No worries.
In just an hour. It's amazing how you managed to combine that.
No worries. Thanks for the question.
you.
Thanks for everyone who's still here.